this whole question of what is peace. Just ask yourself, are we at peace in Afghanistan? There's a place to talk about what is peace. I mean, we stopped fighting there. You haven't heard anything about Afghanistan for weeks because the issue moved from Afghanistan, boom, over to Saddam Hussein. And you might ask yourself, how did that happen? Well, it's because for 15 years, people have wanted to change what was going on in Iraq. And this was the moment they had, and they went for it. They used the momentum of the Afghanistan events related to 9/11, and weapons of mass destruction are not really the issue, in my view. And it's not bringing democracy to the Middle East, or is it Saddam Hussein or Osama bin Laden or Al-Qaeda? The issue is our addiction to oil. After the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, I had just gotten to the Congress then. And prior to that, for the last 40 years, every decision was, if we do this, what will the Soviets do? Or if the Soviets do that, what will we do? Everything was in that kind of a dichotomous decision making. After the Berlin Wall fell, the question was, what do we do now? We're the most powerful country in the world. What's our reason for existence? How are we going to interact in the world? And during the 90s, from 89 on through the first part of this century, we were basically about making money. And it was all about how do we make more money and how do we make our economy run and fly. And we never came to recognize that we were part of the world. Now, the theory under the new Bush doctrine is that we are the United States and we will tell the world how it's going to be. And then there'll be peace. Nobody would dare rise up against us. Now, I don't know if they have never read history, or if they have read about the Persians, or the Romans, or the Greeks, or the Egyptians, or the Ottomans, or the British, or the French. Go right down the list. There have been a lot of people who've talked like that. And ultimately, they wind up falling apart. And when the United States gets in the position of saying, there's one set of rules for us, and the rest of you have another set of rules, you got a real interesting kind of situation going on. Because the minute I take the position that I can do whatever I want, but you can't, some of you are going to sit there and say, oh yeah, we'll see. Now, let me give you just one example of why I say that. Because what is going on is being sold to you as something that's going to make you safer. If we take out Saddam Hussein, we will stabilize the Middle East and everything will be just nice and peaceful, right? I mean, of course, we do have Afghanistan over here bouncing around a little bit. But otherwise, things are going to be very stable. When we decided in 1991 that we wanted to go into to Iraq and take the Iraqis out of Kuwait, there was we went to the Security Council with a resolution, just as we did very recently here. And the members on the Security Council are 5 permanent members and then 10 rotating members who rotate in from various parts of the world to represent various sections of the universe. And we went to that table wanting to go into Iraq, and we wanted the Security Council to go with us. So some people wanted to go because they thought it was a good idea, throw out the Iraqis. Then there were some people who sort of hung back and said, well, what's in it for us? And so we said, well, here's some cheap Saudi oil. We gave Saudi oil to a lot of people, some of the little countries that were on the Security Council. There was one country that said, no, we're not going for this. Yemen. Now, it's the poorest country in the Arab world. Little tiny country. And they said, no, we're not going for this. You shouldn't be invading Kuwait. And the United States said to Yemen, look, you resist us, and we'll make it the most painful no you've ever cast in the United Nations. Well, the Yemenis said no. And the next day, what we did was we reached in and took an $80 million aid package out. We took every cent of U.S. aid to Yemen out. Well, no, we showed those Yemenis, right? And we showed the whole world what we're like. When you don't do what we say, we will punish you. Well, the question then comes, you know, what do the Yemenis do? Now, how many of you remember a ship called the Ross? Got the right name? The ship that went into Yemen was against the dock, and a little boat came up and blew the side out of it, right? The coal, excuse me, yeah, the coal. Huh, isn't that interesting? There's a little country that we could step on, right? But then we come here and boom. And are we safer? Can we go into Aden anymore? The idea that we will now tell the world what's going to happen and then we'll all be safe is simply not true. It is a myth that's being pushed on people, and I think that when you talk about peace and that you can do it by military power, you are simply overstating the case, and in fact, you're probably making it worse. Let me talk about a couple of other things, and that is this whole business of invasion. I put up this to show you about what's going on, just so you understand. I mean, here's Iraq, little old Iraq here, right? And the last place we were was over here in Afghanistan. Now, why was Afghanistan important? Why would we do all that stuff? Well, it was to get to Al-Qaeda, right? No, wrong. We knew the Al-Qaeda, we knew that the Taliban was there. We knew what's been going on. We've been giving money to Pakistan to pay to make this a stable society. For what reason? Well, the largest and most recent oil reserves in the world have been discovered right in this area, Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan, and we wanted to have a pipeline. Now, you can go across this way, and you can go through, oh my God, go through Chechnya, and oh, well, no, we don't want to go there. Well, we could go under, maybe we could go over to Turkey. Well, or we could come down to Iran. That would be, no, we don't. Iran, they're bad people, right? Where are you going to go? Let's come down through Afghanistan, down to Karachi. The whole of our interest in Afghanistan is about a pipeline for Unocal. And they're putting that thing together right now. I mean, you're not reading it on the front pages of the newspapers, but it's going on, and we all know it. And this line was drawn at the end of the First World War. All these lines around these countries were drawn by, you read the Sunday newspapers, there's a story about a woman dragging a stick through the desert, and the Arabs following along and putting up cairns of rocks as they drew these borders. These borders were drawn by British and French people who were splitting up the riches of this area. And somehow this Saddam Hussein took it away from us. He nationalized the oil, threw the British out, threw the Americans out. It's no wonder that the people who want this war are British and Americans, right? BP, British Petroleum, Royal Dutch Shell, Texaco, Exxon, 2 American, 2 British companies. They're the ones they threw out in the 1970s, and they would like to have a piece of the action. And as you heard earlier, the French and the Russians have already made some deals, and what is fearful for the French and the Russians is that the United States will go in and grab Iraq, and then suddenly they'll have control of all the oil. And the French will be standing there saying, and the Russians, what about us? So a part of that debate that you saw at the UN was not about Saddam Hussein or weapons of mass destruction, any of that stuff. It was really about who's going to control Iraq the day after. And the real question you have is the day after. Now, the reason I raise that is because I want you to think about the day after the war in 1991. Professor suggested we have had, or somebody suggested, we have had a continuous war in Iraq since 1991. It has never stopped. We have bombed every day. We have used missiles trying to destroy their radar sites and all the rest of it. It's been going on. We've also carried on an economic war with sanctions. And then there's something else. We have carried on a low-level nuclear war in that country from 1991. Let me explain. There's, in the process of doing nuclear energy, there's some waste product, we call it depleted uranium, that's what it's called. The United States government gives it to the weapons manufacturers to put on the end of bullets, to put on the end of shells, and it's very dense and therefore has tremendous armor-piercing power. And it is used now, it'll go through one tank and right straight through a second tank. It is really tough stuff. It's nuclear waste. It's one of the uses for nuclear waste is to put it on shells. Now, the only problem is when it hits, it pulverizes into a fine dust, which lays around in the dust of the desert. And the children walk around in it. And the parents walk around in it. And what's happened in the south, in the southern part of Iraq, down here around Basra, which is where most of that fighting went on. I was down there and visited about 5 weeks ago. There is an epidemic of two things. One is childhood leukemia and lymphoma. And the second thing that's going on there is an absolute epidemic of malformed child at birth. Now, how does that happen? Well, the powder gets inside, goes in, and from 91 to about 95, it sort of works away inside the body, and then you start to see this climb, and it's now a 600% increase in leukemia in children in that part of Iraq. That stuff's in the dust, right? And the mothers and fathers are walking through it, and they're breathing it, and it's getting into their blood system and going into their reproductive organs, men and women. And the children they're producing are without arms, without legs, without eyes, without mouth, terrible malformations. And the question an Iraqi woman asks today when a baby is born is not, is it a boy or a girl? Is it normal? Because it is it's more than 100% increase in malformations at birth because of this low-level uranium dust that we put all over there. We put 300 tons of this stuff down in South Iraq. We also used it in Bosnia. We used it in Kosovo. And we are now going to reap the harvest. Now, what you should all be thinking about when you think about the cost and benefit of this so-called let's go into Iraq. Who goes in the military today? Well, we, in 1975, got rid of the draft. And I understand you're going to have a seminar on the draft here in a couple of days. The students are really onto something, because you should be thinking about the draft, even though most of you have never had anything to do with it. When I was your age, we all had a requirement of 2 years service. And you went into the military, and that had a big part in what went on in the Vietnam War. Now, we don't have the draft, we have a volunteer army. Everybody volunteers. Why does somebody volunteer to go in the army? Well, they may have in their family people who served in the army, it's a good idea, or maybe they can't find any way to get to college, so they think, well, if I go in the military, I can get some GI Bill, and I can get some training, and I get some way to get started. And we're talking about basically lower income people in this country. Who are those lower income people in this country? Well, you know, it's poor whites and people of color. The population today in this country is 20% people of color. But the military that will be on the ground there are 50% people of color, brown and black, just like they were in Vietnam. So what we're planning, what the people in the White House are planning today, is to take those troops, put them on the ground, and walk them through that stuff that we know has created problems for Iraqis, both children and mothers and fathers. That's what our government is contemplating, and as far as I'm concerned, that's one of the costs. Never mind that it's going to cost $200 billion over the next 10 years, as was suggested. This is not an overnight event. We're going into a country and we're saying we're going to make it into a democracy. Boy, these people are really going to be lucky. I met a woman down in Basra who said to me, a nurse, she said, you know, if you had gone in and taken out Saddam Hussein in 1991, we wouldn't have been so upset. But you've had us under sanctions for 11 years, and you've punished us, the people, not him. He hasn't hurt him a bit. but you've punished us. The business about the 5,000 kids who died a year, it's a very simple thing we've done in that we have cut off their economy to the point where they have no way to buy things, so they are totally reliant on Saddam Hussein for their food. They get a monthly ration. Every single Iraqi gets a monthly ration that equivalent to 2,500 calories per day, and they are living on that. No fresh meat, no fresh vegetables. It's all things that are dry, like cooking oil and rice and wheat and those sorts of things. And therefore you have women who are malnourished. So malnourished women produce low birth weight babies who are put into a society with bad water and wind up getting chronic diarrhea. And they figure that it's been 5,000 kids a year die of diarrhea because of this cycle of malnutrition that ill prepares a kid to survive. That's 5,000 a month. That's 500,000 kids who died unnecessarily in Iraq because of sanctions. So that was sanctions. Then you've got depleted uranium. And we thought the Defense Intelligence Agency put out a report in 1992 that said within 6 months of sanctions, Saddam will come down because we're going to crush their economy. Well, we did. We've crushed their economy. I carry this in my wallet. It's a 250 dinar note. That's the money of Iraq. It used to be, this bill was worth $875. It's worth 11 cents today. You talk about a country where we crushed the economy. We did it. We squeezed them with the sanctions so tightly that we have absolutely destroyed the middle class. Nobody has any money left except a very thin crust across the top. Now we're saying, oh, well, we'll gather up all the Iraqis in this country who've been living in the United States, and we'll put them together, we'll send them over there, and there'll be a government. Can you imagine what the ordinary person in Iraq would say if we picked somebody, as we always do. We picked Karzai in Afghanistan. We said, this is going to be your new president. We picked somebody from the United States to go over there and be the president of Iraq. And people are going to say, where were you for the last 12 years? Living on Long Island, or living in Seattle, or living in Houston, or someplace. And now you're going to come and run this country? You didn't pay any price. Why should we make you the president of this place? And that's what we're saying. We're going to create a democracy. We're going to say, poof, democracy. In a country that's never had a parliament, never had anything. So going into this war, when you start to consider all those things, you have to say to yourself, wouldn't diplomacy be better? Isn't there some way we can do this by some other means than by military force? And that's really what's at issue. You have to decide whether or not, because we are the strongest and most powerful, we ought to use our power in that way, or should we join together with the nations of the world and say, let's try and work this thing out. Everybody wants to disarm him. Nobody argues disarmament. Nobody says that Saddam Hussein's a good guy. But the question is, how do you do it? And if you're going to use military power, you create all the problems that I'm suggesting. And a website for you, www.house.gov/McDermott. It's my website, and it has an Iraq reading file. What I've gone over at 100 miles an hour here in this speech is all there in articles in the newspaper. You can read the sites, you can read the source material, and see what has been going on. Because I've started putting all that stuff in there just so people would have a place to look and find out what was really going on. Thank you.
Let me start with the no-fly zone business. We set up the no-fly zone, not the United Nations. The United Nations didn't say there will be a no-fly zone. The United States, France, and Britain set them up. So from the get-go, they've been quasi-legal in an international sense. It'd be like us going up and saying, we're going to have a no-fly zone over British Columbia, and no Canadian planes can fly in British Columbia. If we did that, you'd say, my God, what are we doing? Well, that's what we did in the North and the South, ostensibly to protect various parts of the population. The Kurds in the North and the Shia, who make up 60% of the people in Iraq, are in those areas. But while we're doing it, we always, if we see anything that looks like a target, we shoot it. We bomb radar sites, we bomb all kinds of sites, and funny thing, the Iraqis think that that's not right. They think they should fight back. They shoot at us. Well, we define it all as defensive, but in fact, it really is it's part of the low-level war that's been going on there from the very outset. There's nothing new that's going on recently. It's been going on for 10 years. Now, the other question was raised, why is Saddam singled out? What was pointed out earlier to you is this guy was a great ally of ours. I mean, we were so happy when he took on the Iranians, because the Iranians embarrassed us in Tehran. And so when he said, I want to go over there and give them a bad time, we said, right on, go ahead, buddy, get them. And we'll give you some arms, and we'll do whatever you need. I mean, we were helping him. The gas he used came from stuff that we gave him. We knew what was going on. And now we act so self-righteous, like, oh my God, can you believe what he did? But in fact, we were aware at the time. So it only makes sense to me in terms of those people, as I said earlier, who have wanted to do this for more than 15 years. There's been a group of people who've wanted to rewrite that geography in the Middle East for a very long time, but they were waiting for the opportunity. And 9/11 gave them the opportunity. It made the American people, made all of you afraid, so now they can play with your fear. They can make you, I'll make you safe if you just let me do what I want. I'm President of the United States, so you just let me do it, and I'll take care of it for you. As long as you believe that, you'll do anything. You'll let Bush do anything. And that's where this country is right now, is trying to figure out, is this really going to make us safer? And, you know, every Friday when you hear, oh, gee, this is going to be a code orange weekend, they're going to bomb all the bridges on the West Coast, what does that do? That just stirs up the anxiety in people all the time. You can never get away from it. You can see how what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And what is not being admitted by our government at this point is that that's true. They somehow believe there's one set of rules for the United States and another set for all the rest of you. And that's something that will not work internationally beyond, unless we're willing to have war or use our military everywhere that anybody steps out of line. And that could be a pretty amazing, if you look at that map that I had up there, who's next on the list? Well, the President already said his State of the Union last year, Iraq, Iran, and North Korea, right? That's the axis of evil. We got to get those three. Well, now we got Iraq, so let's go to Iran. That'll be next. And then, you know, the Saudis really, I mean, all the terrorists came from Saudi Arabia. I don't know. Why would they be next? Right? And you can see where this leads. I mean, where do we get our oil from today? We get it from Venezuela, Angola, Nigeria, and the Middle East. Well, I mean, there's problems in Nigeria. You just saw that in the U.S. world problem, right? I mean, it's got Muslim and people fighting over there. I mean, we should go stabilize Nigeria because they got a good lot of oil there. And Venezuela, they got that guy down there, Chavez, who's acting kind of like he's running the country himself without paying attention to us. Maybe we should go down and settle Venezuela down. I mean, the implications of doing this in Iraq are not simply just Iraq. They are really internationally. You have to think to yourself, I think somebody said, think 1,000 years. Where are we going to be in 20 or 40 or 50 or 100 years? When you're my age and running this country, you are going to be dealing with the aftermath of what happens in this particular event.
You don't have to say that it's a conspiracy need to understand that this administration is of, by, and for the oil industry.
The majority of Americans did not vote for George W. Bush. Hit me.
It's important that we recognize that, in fact, the majority of Americans align with values of equity, economic justice, a healthy environment, peace, and a world that works for all. And it's our responsibility now to make that majority a reality.